From its beginning, CMC has welcomed everybody. I'm Amelia Robinson, the Opinion and Community Engagement Editor for the Columbus Dispatch. Welcome to Columbus Metro Club. I am also a member of CMC's Board of Trustees. I am pleased to be with all of you today for this very important conversation. Let's take a moment to thank today's sponsors: Capital Crossroads and Discovery Special Investment Districts, the Edwards Companies, Markers, and the Robert Weller Company. Weiler? I was all wrong. Okay. We also want to thank Grange Insurance Center and its wonderful staff for their ongoing support. Thank you as well to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, the Columbus Dispatch, for presenting today's live stream. Let's thank all of these supporting sponsors with a big applaud. Everybody clap. Okay. With many downtown Columbus skyscrapers partially or completely empty, at least part of the solution to Central Ohio's housing crisis seems to be at hand. Can empty skyscrapers be adopted to residential use to help bring downtown Columbus back to life and provide new housing? It sounds like a great idea, but really, is it? To set the stage for today's conversation on turning corner offices into condos, please welcome Mark Condy from our sponsor, the Capital Crossroads and Discovery Special Investment Districts, to present highlights from the new State of Downtown report. Mark.
Thank you, Amelia, and thank you to the Columbus Metropolitan Club for hosting the forum again. It's an honor to be here. I'm pleased to present the annual State of Downtown report prepared by the staff of the Capital Crossroads and Discovery Special Improvement Districts. The districts work in partnership to support the vibrancy of downtown through services and advocacy with a keen focus on a clean, safe, and excellent experience for all. As part of this work, we prepare this annual report about the health of downtown. You can find the full report online at downtownservices.org. So you know things are going well when the report becomes outdated from new announcements just in the last 60 days. In January, Columbus State Community College announced they are set to begin construction on a new $3.5 million child care center, filling a critical need for more child care, both for their students and the community. Yesterday, the Downtown Commission reviewed 4 new housing projects, totaling nearly 450 units. And on Monday, Grant Medical Center announced a $400 million expansion that includes a new trauma center, emergency department, and critical care pavilion. Yes, 3 years after the pandemic, we are getting some clarity on the future of downtown, and that future looks bright. We can now take a look at some specific sectors. First up is housing. The downtown housing population continues to increase. It now stands at 11,650. With 973 units under construction right now, the population will jump higher this year. And I estimate that downtown will have 16,500 residents by the end of 2025. Apartment occupancy remains high at 92.5%, allowing downtown apartments to command higher rents. But this makes the focus on providing affordable housing all the more important so that people of all income levels are able to live near where they work. Right now, there are a little over 600 new units of affordable housing in the development pipeline. Turning to office, which will be the big topic later today, the downtown office market held somewhat steady last year. While the vacancy rate increased from 18.4% to 21.3%, this was largely due to the addition of new space coming to the downtown submarket. Contrast this with the suburbs, where the vacancy rate increased to nearly 28% due to significant negative net absorption. There are some additional warning clouds with 2 million square feet of sublet space available in the entire Central Ohio market. While this space is disproportionately in the suburbs, it will depress rents in the overall Central Ohio market. And a question remains as to how many people are back in the office. Castle Systems has been studying office keycard access activity nationally, and they publish a weekly report on how many workers are returning to the office. They provide data on 10 benchmark cities, one of those being Austin, Texas, which I think in our case is probably the best comparison for Columbus. If we are comparable to Austin, then we likely have somewhere between 51 and 74% of the workforce back in the office, depending on the day. Mondays and Fridays are the lowest occupied days of the week, and Tuesdays are actually turning out to be the highest occupied day of the week. Retail was largely unchanged in 2022. We had 21 retailers open and 20 close, leading to a very, very slight net positive for the year. Highlighting the year, though, for downtown's restaurant scene was the popular Lunchbucks program, a pilot run by the Columbus Downtown Development Corporation. It provided free $10 lunch vouchers for office workers and residents to support downtown restaurants by dining out. Last year, it had an 85% redemption rate, leading to more than $39,000 being directly reimbursed to downtown restaurants. Downtown hospitality got a boost as visitors returned for full-scale events. The hotel occupancy rate increased to 49.1%, up from 34.8% in 2021. And the 28-floor expansion of the Hilton was completed in October. It nearly doubled the number of guest rooms and added 75,000 square feet of new meeting space. The expanded Hilton makes downtown the home to the state's only 1,000-room hotel. So we can now see the pandemic disrupted, but it did not destroy the momentum of the downtown development that was built over the last 20 years. As we look ahead, the new Downtown Columbus strategic plan from the Columbus Downtown Development Corporation sets the stage for that momentum to continue. The new plan will make sure that we create a downtown for all, a very central theme in that proposal, and that the gaps, both literal and figurative, will get filled. The plan was covered in a previous CMC forum, so I'll just go over a couple of highlights. The plan calls for 40,000 residents by 2040. This is entirely doable given the strong demand for urban living, the regional demand for housing, and the large number of developable sites we have downtown. The plan calls for 120,000 people working downtown by 2040. This is also achievable given the momentum we have in our regional economy and the attractiveness of downtowns for young professionals. Finally, the plan calls for growing the number of local, diverse small businesses by 20%. We are already seeing some creative ideas coming from both Columbus City Council and the administration to kickstart this increase and provide better wraparound services for new small businesses. So with the continued string of announcements of new downtown development, along with CDDC's roadmap for the future, the state of downtown will continue to strengthen. Once again, you can find the full report at downtownservices.org. But now we'll welcome today's distinguished speakers. We have Philip Aftuck, Director of Investments for the Bernstein Companies, Tracy Haddon-Lowe, Fellow with the Ann T. and Robert M. Bass Center for Transformative Placemaking at Brookings Metro, and then our host, Sam Rosenthal, Principal, CEO, and Architect with Schooley Caldwell. Sam, the podium is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. Again, I'm Sam Rosenthal, architect and principal at Schooley Caldwell. And I want to begin by telling you about how in the summer of 2011, Schooley Caldwell began our efforts to restore and repurpose the icon of our skyline at the Levesque Tower. The building today features owner-occupied condos, apartments, a hotel, office space, a coffee shop, and a restaurant. And it's a true mixed-use building and proof that office spaces can be converted to provide a literal new lease on life for existing buildings. This tale of transformation is one that I could talk about for hours, but we're not here to look at the past. We're really here to talk about the state of downtown and the great things happening in the future. The Central Ohio region, and Columbus in particular, is experiencing remarkable growth and change. Our route to this building today is on a site that used to take us by the police impound lot and used to land on an industrial strip, a real story of transformation. And same with our downtown parks at the Scioto Mile. Again, vision and investment embodied here, and that's something that should really be applauded. Mark just spoke about the 40,000 residents by 2040, and we know that conversions of existing office buildings will certainly play a part in providing these new homes to people. I'd like to ask our panelists now, would you please tell us about some of the challenges of converting these existing office buildings into residential uses?
Sure, I'm happy to start. I mean, I think the first challenge is that most office buildings actually aren't 100% vacant. So an office building might be half empty, but when I hear you say that, I also hear you say that the office building is half full. And that means that there are existing tenants that are using the building, that are paying rent, and that those tenants have leases and a right to use the space, and they're not going to just disappear into Zoom.
Tracy's absolutely right. I mean, on top of that, you have a building that was built 50 plus years ago to be an office, and you're going to put, in our case, 400 plus one-bedroom studios and two-bedroom apartments, a gym, and amenity floor. And so completely something it was not built with that in mind. And so, when we look at floor plates, we have to look at, we have the four walls. And so it's our job to determine how we make the most efficient, best use within those four walls. On top of that, a lot of these buildings are historic, and they're on the National Registrar. And so there's certain features, or ceiling tiles, windows. In our case, there's a historic bathroom on the 24th floor that you can't touch, and you have to incorporate that. And whether you incorporate it into someone's living room or you incorporate it into your amenity space, it's incredibly challenging. But you're also right. I mean, back to what you said on leases. I think when we purchased the Continental Centre, it was maybe 30 or 40% leased. And we couldn't just start day one and start drilling core drills through somebody's office. I mean, we had to really work with these tenants to figure out, what their needs were and how we accommodated that. Now with the environment of office, a lot of office tenants either signed a lease 5-10 years ago and they don't need the same amount of space, or they don't want to be in the exact same location. And so I think coming to them with the optionality of, would you like to downsize? Would you like to go somewhere else? We have other plans for this building. Is just kind of it's a welcome message right now to a lot of office tenants out there.
All right, so what can you tell us about how the decision is made to repurpose a building? We know that the commercial office rents are higher than other uses like residential, so there's a market premium for these office buildings. In many cases, just taking the old tired office building and completing a renovation can reposition that building to be competitive as an office building again. So as tenants leave a building, is there some type of a tipping point that makes this conversion a good idea?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'd say there's really no magic number, but when buildings typically get below 60% occupied of office tenants, it's really difficult, and I'm talking Class A trophy office buildings, it's really difficult to service those tenants, to provide them everything that an office user needs, and then to take that a step further, with interest rates going up, with tax rates going up, it's harder to carry that building. You have less people paying for a building that has increasing capital cost needs. And you get to a point where the tenants that are staying aren't getting the services they kind of signed up for. And as a landlord, it's difficult to do that. And so you kind of get to this point as a landlord where you really have to look at yourself in the mirror and you have to say, do I want to invest good money and invest in the TI, invest in the leasing commissions, and redo my entry space and redo all this to bring this building up to standards as a trophy office building today, or do I convert it? And I think in the Matrix it's like a red and blue pill, and so here it's kind of the same thing, and it's a really difficult pill that unfortunately a lot of office landlords are having to think about right now.
I think location is also a huge factor. One thing that I thought was really interesting in Mark's presentation that he mentioned is that, if you think that offices downtown are in trouble, wait till you hear about suburban submarkets. And, the reality is that across the board, whether you're in the center city, or at the urban fringe, commercial real estate and offices in particular will be in the most highly accessible locations in their submarket. They're going to be great locations across the board. But it is not true that all of these locations are created equal. So given that the bar is higher than ever for what it means to be a trophy office and to be the best positioned office product, that means that offices in incredibly central downtown, extraordinarily regionally accessible locations are going to be better positioned to remain offices than office product in more fringe locations. And so I think you'll see a strong interest in office to residential conversion in pretty much every submarket outside of the very best locations.
So personally, I find great joy and fulfillment in projects like Levesque that save our existing historic buildings, but I'm also acutely aware of the fact that the rest of the world isn't as invested in my joy and fulfillment, and that these projects need to be economically viable. Levesque was made possible in big part thanks to state and federal historic preservation tax credits. What can you tell us about existing opportunities, grants, incentives, programs, abatements that you are seeing in other markets that help facilitate these types of projects?
Well, I can tell you right now, Ohio is one of the best states that has a state historic tax credit program. Continental Centre would not happen. I'm sure a lot of other projects in this town and in this state would not happen, but for your great historic tax credit program, which I give a ton of credit to the administration because they doubled it from 5 to 10 million, and Continental was a recipient of the additional 5 million. And so as costs increase, interest rates increase, labor increases, raw materials increase, having that extra incentive on the historic side is critical. There is a federal historic tax credit, but having that additional state tax credit, I think, is what makes cities in Ohio a lot more competitive than, say, cities and states that don't have that credit. Additionally, there's tax abatement incentives, which are important because when we look at it as, you have a building right now, and I can't tell you what Continental pays in real estate tax off the top of my head, but it's paying X, right? And it's an empty office building that has no office tenants and really generating no revenue and nothing, essentially positive, empty, right? But then a developer comes in and uses their own capital and develops and creates something that people can live in and spends money on, and that will be worth, well, we hope it's worth a lot more than it is today. It should pay more in taxes. But when should it pay more in taxes? Is it year 5? Is it year 10? If you ask me, maybe it's year 50. I don't know, but it's. And it's kind of that, it's that conversation of how do we as developers make smart investments to put these buildings back on a higher valuation, back on the tax roll, contributing in real estate taxes, but how do we do it at a time and at a phased-in strategy that makes sense for both us and the community?
There's a Goldilocks question that you're really asking here about not really about how much these projects cost, but really like who should pay and how much of this needs to happen and how do you kind of figure out what those numbers are. So, I think across the board, you're going to see that cities in extremely strong markets and cities in extremely weak markets are understand that there's a cost to doing these kinds of products and these kinds of projects, and that if there are different public interests that may be represented in subsidizing these conversions. Historic preservation being a super obvious example, right? Like these stunning buildings that are iconic, that are part of the skyline that you just absolutely want to keep. But there are other public interests that could potentially be represented in these conversions, and of course, a lot of the product that most badly needs to be dealt with right now is not eligible for historic tax credits. These are architectural contributions from a point in history best forgotten. So there has to be a different solution for that product. For the spec office product from the 80s, realistically, Even a tax abatement alone is not going to address what it's going to take to get some of these projects done. So the question becomes, what other public interests can be represented in these projects to justify additional public investment, and how much of that makes sense? And so, this is where you start talking about affordable housing.
And that's some really great insight, and exactly where I hope that we head with this discussion about the impact of these projects. We talked about challenges, we talked about opportunities. Again, Levesque was a great example, using a public-private partnership to enhance sidewalks, bring street trees in, to take a lane of traffic out of Broad Street. I'm wondering about other, like the ripple effects that you're seeing when these projects are completed. What are the positive impacts that are felt along the block, the next street, really the neighborhood where these projects are taking place?
So this is a trickier question than it sounds like. It is a good idea to have mixed-use downtowns, right? The idea that you can have central business districts that are 90% office buildings in the era of lumpy remote work. It's pretty obvious that that's not a good idea and that you want to mix other stuff in. But most U.S. commercial cores are more mixed use than that. The CBD that's 90% office is like a few block area, and downtowns have other stuff going on in them. So adding housing, you have to be careful how you think about it to make sure that you're not weakening your downtown's core value proposition as across the board in every metro area in the United States, the single most important job center in the regional economy. You don't want to substitute housing for jobs. You want to go about these projects at a reasonable scale and strategically so that you create downtowns that are 24/7, right? That don't, if people are living there, there'll be people there after 5 p.m. But you can also create, vibrant downtowns that are vibrant after 5 p.m. with nightlife. So, housing doesn't have to be the only answer. It's something you want in the mix, and it's something you want in order to diversify the market base that supports retail and amenities. But I think that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and you need every tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, and Tracy's absolutely right? You can't convert every office building to residential. It just doesn't work. I mean, you've got to think about what makes cities great, what makes residents want to live downtown, and that's to be able to walk to work, to walk to the grocery store, to walk to see their friends and to their favorite bars and restaurants. And so if you lose retail, if you lose office, and everyone goes remote, and the offices flee the cities and go to the suburbs, then why would you live downtown? The proposition there just doesn't make sense anymore. And so it was, I could tell you that not every office building makes for a great conversion. Not every conversion should be done. Not every building should be converted, because at the end of the day, you do want a mixed-use city. You do want people to be able to have office buildings, have hotels, and have a vibrant retail center. And so, speaking Continental, specifically, I think to your question, I think the ripple impacts, the positive benefits, right, is you had a functionally obsolete office building where tenants where their leases would come up and they would leave, and that building was going dark, and around it was going dark, and the weeds were growing on the sidewalk, and we could go on, right? But we're going to, literally light up that building, create 409 units, create a first floor retail space and amenities for our tenants to enjoy. And so, to answer your question, that's what I hope we bring as a positive impact. But, Tracy's absolutely right. We shouldn't convert every office building to residential, because then the residential demand will fall because people won't need to be there.
So I want to build on what Phil just said. The single most important placemaking thing that adding housing downtown does, whether it's through conversion or just by building on a surface parking lot or a vacant site, is that it strengthens demand for the remaining office product, because commuting is terrible. having housing near jobs is, I mean, we did not need COVID to tell us that this was a good idea. That's been a good idea for a long time. No, people didn't like commuting before everyone knew how to use Zoom. And the best thing about putting housing near jobs is not just that it gives people more access to opportunity, it's that it gives those jobs access to a workforce that has a really low friction commute.
All right. So we touched on it a little bit earlier, but we really must acknowledge the housing shortage, and especially the affordable housing shortage in our communities. Skyscrapers and even more modest, shorter downtown office buildings are far beyond the cost of a typical home or apartment. So this leads me to ask about ownership. Most of these buildings are owned by an entity like an LLC that's not looking to sell an asset, but also might not be positioned to reinvest enough to reinvigorate that property in the market. There are things like co-ops, condo owners associations. Are you seeing any types of partial ownership transfers as opposed to full building sales and overhauls? Or is there any path to home ownership in some of these buildings?
This is something that's going to really vary by state to state. So I am a huge proponent of community ownership. I think that this is an ownership society, and that, you know, I would say this is someone who has rented a home for a really long time. It's an unstable way to live. There was a period of my life where I moved 7 times in 5 years with kids. We need pathways to ownership, and communities of ownership are one way to make ownership more accessible. The first place I ever bought was a condo. That said, in the US from state to state, how risky it is to build condos varies a huge amount, but because of state law. And so this is something that it's really important for the public and private sector to work together credibly on, to come up with a reasonable regulatory environment in which to produce that kind of housing. But I think that the reason that there's strong demand for multifamily isn't because in the US there's strong demand for renting per se. It's because there's strong demand for smaller footprint, highly accessible, highly amenitized living, and that should be an ownership opportunity as well.
So I'll say with historic tax credits, you can't have a condo structure for at least the period of compliance. So I'll take the easy way out there by saying that we're for rent and not for sale, at least during compliance. But I think bringing apartments to downtown areas, especially to one, downtown Columbus with a young population of either students coming from Ohio State, it's important that if they don't know they're going to be in, let's just say, Columbus for the long term, that we're not saddling them up with a 30-year mortgage, that they don't need to put 20% down, but they have a very nice place to live in a great part of town with all the amenities. And so, I absolutely agree with you. Home ownership is very important, and I still think that's the American dream. But I also think it's important to have places where, particularly people out of college or people that are moving from the suburbs into the city or people that just want a place in the city or whatever the case may be, have somewhere that they can afford, that's in a great location, that has all the amenities. And I think we provide that in our developments, especially of these adaptive reuse projects.
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. You need both.
Tracy, you talked a little bit about smaller footprints just now, and a little earlier about the 80s office building that's not such a great candidate for some of these conversions. I'd like to imagine a scenario where maybe we could see a computer server farm occupying a windowless space and providing the free heat and hot water for other spaces. Are there other types of uses that make sense for some of these properties? A skyscraper farm?
Actually, I do know of a project that converted a vacant office building into a vertical farm. So it has happened one time. But there's one of everything. And I think that we also, we have to think bigger about which building code requirements are really necessary and which should be more flexible in order to ease adaptive reuse, whether it's office to residential or, to hotel or to institutional. Like, we should just generally speaking make our built environments able to, the pace of change in society is increasing. It is a problem that our built environments are really rigid and change slowly. That is a structural issue that has to change. And so that's about the building code. And so, for example, this question of like the interiors of these buildings that don't have access to direct light. I mean, to be honest with you, I personally think that it would be okay to have bedrooms that didn't have windows. Usually when I'm in my bedroom, I'm trying to close my eyes and sleep. and I will say, like, when I was living in an apartment with my really young kids, I used a closet as a bedroom because I wanted my kids to be, the light makes them wake up too early from their nap. So, I think that we need to think, I think that building codes in a lot of cities, I think, are way too rigid and have way too many requirements. And that we should be thinking not just about how to have like the greenest building code possible or the most fireproof building code possible, but also like a streamlined code that really just addresses core issues and doesn't bake in these kinds of like peripheral values that don't need to be represented there.
You're right, and when we talk about ESG and this focus on green building, and although maybe on the surface you'd look at a project like Continental and say, I don't see where the green features are, but really, we're taking a 350,000 square foot building, and we're reusing it, we're repurposing it, we're recycling it, and we're not using a bunch of lumber and new steel and other materials to go ground up. We're using something that was there, and I think at its core, adaptive reuse projects are very green, right? I mean, we're taking systems that are 10 plus years old and we're putting in modern day VRF energy efficient systems. We're putting in Energy Star appliances, low flush water toilets. And I think all these things that we're doing as we do this adaptive reuse makes our buildings greener and it recycles them. And so I think it might not be the first thing you think about, but it is something that, all of our buildings are 2 Green Globes rated, which is equivalent to LEED Silver, and I think it's an important feature for us to do. It's an important, it's just a citizen of the world to do, and I think our tenants appreciate that, both on their lower utility bills and just being part of that overall project.
All right. We'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone now. If you're watching online, please type your questions into the chat. Before we take audience questions, I have one final question for our panelists. We started talking about some of these building codes, and as we turn our attention to the broader global community, we can find older cities that seem to be thriving and continually evolving to serve residents and businesses. A city like Barcelona or Rome or Mexico City comes to mind. How do these other cities continue to maintain their density and vibrancy for centuries?
Okay, well, I was in Barcelona 2 weeks ago, so I don't know who told you to ask that question, but it was very timely. It's a mix, right? I mean, I think, kind of back to what we were talking about before, you look at some of these cities, and they truly are mixed use, right? And let's use your Barcelona example. You could stay in a hotel, and you could see where people are walking to work. There's relatively few cars. There's a great public transportation system. Everyone goes to eat, and there's small bodegas and grocery stores everywhere. And I think that core that people want to be in cities just makes them more successful. Now, looking at this at a more zoomed out picture, right? Those European cities you named are hundreds plus more years old than Columbus and many of our cities here, and so they've got some time on us. But that said, I think if we think about, how do we make cities truly mixed income, mixed use, open to everybody and an aggregator of ideas and just thought and just vibrancy, I think will ensure the success of the long term. And I can tell you, Columbus specifically, we're in other cities, but Columbus has a lot going for it. Someone told me that you have an Intel chip plant going out of town somewhere, I heard.
You heard about that?
I heard about that a couple of times. And there's a lot of tailwind happening here, right? I mean, take this forum as an example. We're not doing these forums in every city we're in. And so I think the fact that so many of you showed up today, you're concerned about your city, you want to know what's going on, you want to know how you can make it better. You have Capital Crossroads is doing a great job, making sure you go in the right direction. That's positive. You have that in Columbus here, and a lot of cities don't. And so, hats off, kudos to you. And so I think that kind of ensures that you're going in the right direction.
Well, I'm ready to retire because Phil can just take over. I thought that was an incredible answer. What I'll add to what Phil said is correct, that these cities are successful over a timeline of centuries because they're built around a traditional pattern of development that is as old as human settlement, and that includes city centers that are extremely dense, pedestrian first and pedestrian oriented, and very mixed use. And most of the United States is built on a different development pattern. We don't know if that would work here because we haven't tried. So we could try, but the reality, I think, is that most of what happens in the immediate future in the built environment, it's going to be based on what we already have, and we don't have. We shouldn't be constantly starting over. That's the mistake that we're always making. We need to take what we have and do what we can to improve it, and that's exactly what the adaptive reuse conversation is about. Just think even bigger about it. This isn't just about the adaptive reuse of buildings. What about streets? What about public spaces? What about governance and institutions? All of these things should be flexible and adaptive and more responsive to the current moment and to the trends that are going to shape the future.
Excellent. It's CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. Jane Scott with CMC is curating questions from today's live stream audience. For those of you with us in person, please join Jane at the microphone. Out of respect for others, please keep your questions brief and to the point so we can get to as many as possible. Please also keep in mind that questions do end with a question mark. Jane, what is our first question?
Well, I have a number, and then we'll do every other one here, okay? Kathy Fox, what carrots and sticks might be employed to encourage infill development in our downtown where we still have a lot of surface parking lots? Question mark.
So, we were just talking about the last question, right, and how we make cities better, how we make them more ultra mixed use. And I think a lot of that begins with, these empty parking lots, right? You think about parking lots, they're designed to bring people from out of town, commute in, have them stay here, and then have them drive home. But what if we thought about having them stay here, live here, work here, and play here? And I think there's a way to think about parking lots, whether it be the tax rates or some other incentives, whether it be a real estate tax abatement to encourage development on the lots. But I think it's important to carrot or stick, tax rate or tax abatement, to think about how we think about those parking lots and what they're used for. That said, we'll always need parking. I'm reminded of that all the time, but it's important to just not have a bunch of empty, dark lots in a city, because that's not what makes cities successful.
You can stuff someone full of carrots and hit them with sticks as much as you want, but if they are surrounded by a whole bunch of walls that are in their way, they're not going to be able to move and do anything. They're just going to lie there stuffed full of carrots and covered in bruises. So I'm getting this question a lot from cities right now. And my question back is, have you gotten out of your own way yet? Do you have a vision that is flexible? And have you correspondingly evaluated the entire regulatory ecosystem in which the built environment changes to make sure that it is aligned to deliver that vision? Have you modernized your zoning code? Is your comp plan up to date? These are the questions these are hard questions that I can really relate to elected officials and staff wanting to run away from, but this is the work, and it has to be done. So I think it's really important for cities to get out of their own way before they even start to worry about the carrots and the sticks, though those will also be required. Realistically, the state also has to be a partner in addressing a lot of this stuff. And so where US politics is right now is that it's very difficult for cities and states to collaborate legislatively. And we need to understand the current moment as we emerge into the post-COVID reality as a time when we've spent a few years not talking to each other and yelling at each other a lot, which is not the same as talking, and hit reset and try to identify small opportunities to work together, build shared consensus, and make changes. We have to do it one baby step at a time, but we have to start doing it. And I think what downtowns are going through is a good opportunity to try to have some of these bipartisan and these city-state conversations about what needs to happen legislatively.
My name is Brian Urbanski, and I'm the founder of the Aubrey Affordable Housing Foundation. And I'm really excited about the fact that, I think we'd all agree that anything that adds housing to the Columbus area is a big step in the right direction. And I really appreciate the fact that the panel has identified that affordable housing or workforce housing is a big important part of that component. And the challenge is by wanting to bring people into the Columbus downtown area, while that is important, we still see so many challenges that those in the workforce have of finding affordable housing. Places like Franklinton, which we used to call the Bottoms, but is now a very vibrant area with Gravity and a lot of other developments going on. Old Town East has been growing for many years. The south side around Children's Hospital is regentrifying. We're seeing traditionally historical affordable housing areas just pricing those in our workforce out of the market. And there are a lot of initiatives right now. The Robert Weiler Company and their partners are doing some extraordinarily activities. But my question is, what can we do to create in the downtown area and create and preserve more affordable housing for workforce, which is a very challenged area right now?
Okay, there is no magic answer. I get asked this question everywhere I go to, and there's no magic answer to how to scale affordable housing. It is always going to be a niche product. The vast majority of people are going to live in market rate housing in the US forever. That's just how it's going to be. That said, affordable housing is also always going to be important. There's always going to be a percentage of the population that's going to need it, and their housing needs must be served. Everyone will feel the pain if their needs are not met, not just them. So, new construction is the most expensive way to produce affordable housing, and new construction downtown is going to be the most expensive of the most expensive way to produce more affordable housing. I think that it's time for cities to think really big about acquisition. A lot of developers, forgive me for speaking for you, Phil, stop talking, you should answer this question too. A lot of developers want an exit strategy for after they get to year 15 of a project or whatever. And knowing that there's an always eager buyer out there for housing product, it could be a really good thing. So I think that cities can pass legislation that privileges them as purchasers, and that they can dedicate funding to acquiring housing. And that to me, I think, is the simplest and most straightforward, most economical, most rational way to increase the supply of affordable housing, to just acquire existing housing and preserve it.
You're absolutely right. If the state, the city wants to acquire assets and make it 100% affordable at whatever level they deem, I think that's a great strategy. You know, as a developer, where it gets tricky is when you have an entity force a certain percent at a certain level of AMI affordable in our building, because then, you know, just like with anyone's pro forma, if you push on one side of the scale, the other side has to go up. And so if you make 20% affordable, then the other 80% just has to pay more. It has to level out. And so I think that's the difficult part when cities or municipalities really try to push one side or the other. But that said, I mean, you know, personally at the Bernstein Companies, we always feel that, you know, our best amenity is our price. And we try to deliver units that have all the monitor amenities, we can talk about all of them, but that also are affordable to a workforce family, right? We never deliver at the most expensive price point in the market, right? We're not the lowest, right? But we're there for somebody who is looking for a quality unit in a great location with all the amenities as downtown has to offer. And so, you know, that's something we take very seriously at our company. You know, it's something that we always think about when we design. You know, do our tenants want this? Are we over-designing, right? Because there has to be a return on our investment. You know, or can we skip this, or can we think of other alternative ways, and can we pass those savings along to our tenants? And so that's something that we always think about, and we're very cognizant of. So don't steal our tagline of best amenities are price.
That's such a good tagline,
It's our tagline. I know. It's a great tagline, but it's ours.
My name is Carol Looper, and I'll ask you my question first. You referred to the Levesque Tower as a project that took a lot of work, took a lot of money, took a lot of grants, and exists as a multi-use building. How successful is it? If you use it as an example for others, how successful has it been? My husband's law firm was on the 12th floor for 42 years, and the changes that were made were not conducive to the businesses staying there. The parking was taken over, and the construction was quite heavy. How successful is the Levesque Tower as a multi-use building?
Carol, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest successes of the Levesque is that it had those ripple effects, and we saw new entryway and a valet drop-off for the Palace Theater. We see activity there. The hotel is filling up. This week, we're about to say hello to 20,000 guests for the Arnold, and the hotels are filling up. You're right about the office space, though, and that's probably why the building was converted. 10-foot floor to floor, things close together, just archaic systems. And I'm sorry, I was the one that did the drawings to get your husband's office out. But I also look at the fact that the last of the 8 condos was finally sold. I look at 69 apartments that are above 90% occupancy. People are finally back at the restaurants, and the Starbucks does amazing business, especially for the folks right across the street at City Hall. The office space, I think, continues to struggle, and I think that's just simply a single building where the office space is the wrong use for today's market.
So I'm probably going to butcher this name, Marek Davis from CCAD. As a person with a disability, she says she's blind, who can't drive a car and struggles with mobility. I'd like to know what ways you're planning to make downtown more accessible.
I can speak about Continental Centre. I mean, I can talk about downtown, but I think when you've got a building built so long ago, right, it clearly doesn't comply with today's modern ADA standards and practices. I could give you an actual example. I mean, you can go through the sidewalk and see it's completely uneven, so I imagine it's only a hazard for somebody with limited vision. So, when we're done and when we deliver the Continental Centre, it'll fully comply with all ADA standards. You're going to have level and smooth sidewalks all around it, and so I think it's important as we do these adaptive reuse projects. We always comply with the ADA, and then what's around us in the public right away is well lit and smooth, and I think open for everybody to use.
Everyone, I do wish we had more time, but I'm getting the wrap-up signal, so we'll turn it back over. We'll do one more question before we turn it over.
Just real quick, I thought Tracy's comments about tradition were very well stated in light of the fact that so much of what we're striving to achieve we used to have, like a retail magnet downtown and little trolleys that took people around, and I'm thinking that the car and urban sprawl pretty much destroyed that. So to what extent would getting rid of cars downtown facilitate achieving some of the goals we're talking about today?
So, every action has a reaction. And you can't just ban cars or defund the police or close state mental institutions or whatever it is without having a plan for what is going to replace that, right? And so, what we saw, what downtowns are going through right now, and what we saw during COVID, is that if there are fewer people driving downtown, that means that there's excess right-of-way that can be repurposed to other uses. So you can take more, not 100% incremental, but more incremental steps towards right-sizing infrastructure and what use it's devoted to in order to align the built environment with the needs of the current moment. And that's something that a lot of cities did on a kind of temporary or like pop-up basis during COVID. And what is needed to be done right now is to think through what is the best of those adaptations, what worked the best, what did we learn, and what opportunities are there to apply those lessons to do things that are more permanent.
All right, everyone, I do wish we had more time, but I am indeed getting the wrap-up signal. So we'll turn it back over to Amelia Robinson for concluding remarks.
Well, I hope everybody's found that as illuminating as I did. I learned so much about where I might try to find a house, or live. A lot of places to look at. We want to thank today's sponsor. We want to thank Capital Crossroads and Discovery Special Improvement District, the Edwards Companies, Marker, and the Robert Weiler. Did I say it wrong again? Weiler Company. Thanks to Grange Insurance Auburn Center for its support. Thank you to our virtual seat patron and to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and of course to the Columbus Dispatch, where I work, for supporting today's live stream. And our very special appreciations to today's speakers. We have Mark Conti, I'm really terrible today, sorry about that. Phil Aftuck, Tracy Hayton-Lowe, Lau, and also our host, Sam Rosenthal. So thank you to them. If you would, please make plans now to attend next Wednesday's forum, Black Women Entrepreneurs, Building Success at Zora's House, right here at Grange Insurance Auburn Center. Please take a moment also to answer the short survey that you can find in your form. And thanks to everybody who came out today, including you, and you, all of you. We cannot do this without you. Have a great afternoon. Thanks.